Ooh, out here taking my walk again. But today I was thinking about something I saw on Timcast. Well, he was talking about the whole recent thing where a lot of people are talking about the conspiracies about bunkers and how all these countries and the United States and the super rich and mega rich are building bunkers to like survive the apocalypse. And I thought it was kind of interesting. And then like the part that I found really interesting was like the misconception because Tim is about my age, and I'm like, how can you be my age and not remember there's a movie called there's a movie back in the 90s called Blast from the Past where the guy grew up in a bunker, 30 something years in a bunker, and then he comes out in the city and like all this stuff. And I was thinking about it because he said like there's probably technology the government's using that we don't know anything about to make it possible to live in a bunker. And I'm like, yeah, no, they're using like old technology because technology to live in a bunker indefinitely has been around for a long time. It's not even like some secret technology. It's like very normal technology. Not only is it pretty normal technology, it's more old school technology, like older technology that would be used in these bunkers. Because to be honest, if you look at all the shows about living in bunkers, like that movie is just one example, but there's like Fallout and Silo recently. Those two series revolve around people living in bunkers underground, and both of those series, all the technology is from like the 1940s. It's not even like modern-ish technology from the 2000s. It's old technology. And do you want to know why? Because old technology would better stand up to actual being in a bunker for an extended period of time, for not just because it's like harder to break physically, but because it'll be better to stand up to things like an EMP pulse, and like in case of like a nuclear bomb, earthquakes and things like that, it better stands up to that stuff because it's not as fragile as the technology we use. That's the technology we use now. Much better, much faster, much more efficient. There's a lot more, but at the same time, we got all that, but we sacrifice its durability because we don't need it to be super durable to stand up to a whole bunch of different things. We need it to be more efficient. We need it to be much smaller. So in order to get that, we have to sacrifice durability. But if you're building a bunker on the ground, you don't really care if it's super small. You need it to be more durable than for it to be small. So you make it a little bit bigger so that you can make components a little bit more hefty and durable. So you make things a little bit bigger. Yeah, it may cost you a little bit more space, but at the same time, that just means excavating them a little bit more. You're not really that concerned about it. But I thought about it a little bit more, and then I realized everybody thinks it's a conspiracy, and it's so hard to believe because people don't realize how easy it is to actually build a bunker on the ground and live in it without like a lot of problems going wrong, just like people live on boats. You just have to apply different specifications basically to your bunker and different ways of doing things than you would if you were in a regular building. So the main things you're going to need to live indefinitely or for a long period of time is you're going to need water, you're going to need proper air circulation and oxygen basically, and you're going to need food along with energy. Those things can all be supplied and kept on the ground without in a concealed or sealed off environment that doesn't expose you to the outside. If you're preparing for, say, a nuclear holocaust or an EMP pulse or a flare from the sun, you're going to need to have like a lead-lined bunker. So it's going to keep radio waves out and EMs out and nuclear radiation out. So basically, you're not really going to have much contact with the outside world. So you're going to have to build it with that in mind. Sounds extreme, and you're going to think, well, we don't have a lot of technology that's going to allow us to seal ourselves into a box for a long period of time without running out of oxygen. And the answer to that is yes, we do. We've had it forever. If you look on NASA's website, they even have instructions on how to do this on NASA's website, open to public. And these are things we used to do in school. I don't know why we don't do it anymore. But yeah, they had little projects for kids to do in elementary and middle school on how to build a self-sustaining ecosystem, or basically how to build something that will be able to keep you alive in a sealed box so you would have enough oxygen. These are things available on NASA's website. So basically, what you would actually need to do first is have a stable source of oxygen or a way to filter your air so that you won't have pollutants in your air, and then you don't have too much carbon dioxide in your air. And so what you need is something called a CO2 scrubber. There are electronic versions of CO2 scrubbers and all kinds of stuff that's very efficient that they currently use in like the space station. But also there's another CO2 scrubber that they use and they have working plans for like when they go to like a different planet where you're going to need to be in the air for like 6-7 months at a time. You can't exactly just scrub the air from carbon dioxide and not have no oxygen being generated or all the oxygen being converted. For that, you will need plants. Just like our planet works, we convert the carbon dioxide back into oxygen as plants grow so that we can continue to breathe and the plants live. That's how that works. Now, the thing is, trees are not actually what does most of the work. Algae is what does 90% or 80% of the work. 80% of the oxygen on the planet is produced by algae, and all of that is found in the ocean. That's what we need to live. Based on NASA's study and their calculations, I don't know the exact calculation, but it takes about 3 liters of an algae water solution to generate enough oxygen and filter out the air from carbon dioxide for one person indefinitely. As long as you have that 3-liter mixture, you can basically live in that room with that bottle indefinitely. You won't have to worry about suffocating. 3 liters is actually not that much. That's 2 soda bottles, basically, 2-liter soda bottles, and there's enough room in there for a lot of air for you to pump air in and out. So basically, you would have, what would be an easy way to do it is just to create like multiple 300-liter vials, which is not huge. It's basically a giant fish tank, not even a giant fish tank, just a large fish tank, basically. You put 3 of those, 4 of those inside of a room, and you will create basically enough oxygen for 300-400 people to live off indefinitely and not have to worry about oxygen conversion. And that's it. Imagine if you have a multi-layer bunker, you have maybe 300 or 100 people per layer. You can put 3 or 4 of these vials, 3 or 4 of these containers on each level, and you're producing enough oxygen to 400, 300, 400 people per level. And you have multiple levels, and you put one on each level, and this will produce oxygen for each of the levels. Not producing enough oxygen is one thing, but then it comes, how do you distribute it evenly throughout the entire complex or the multiple levels? And it's like, well, we already have that technology. It's called an AC system. We use it in offices, we use it in schools, we use it pretty much everywhere. It's a regular ventilation system that we'd have to use with slight modifications, but that's about it. For large commercial buildings, there's usually air handlers inside the building and then external condensers that actually draw off the heat and pump the heat outside. Now, we're not going to be able to have a system that has 2 parts like that in the same manner, because we won't be able to have a system outside without being able to go outside in and out. So you're going to have to create a separate area for the condensers and a separate area for everything else. So you're going to have one part that goes inside like normal and one that goes outside. But you're not going to build one outside and inside. What you're going to do is build a separate section for inside and a separate section that will mimic being outside. So in other words, you're going to have one room for all the heat condensers outside. And that's going to where all the heat's going to be pumped to that one room. And in that room, it's just going to simply have a fan or exhaust that goes to the surface to exchange the heat from the surface to the heat inside. Now in there, doesn't matter if radiation gets in there, because it's going to be a separate room that no one's going to live in. You can go in there to change out parts or do any repairs with a radiation suit on. Doesn't really matter that much if the radiation hits these components, because they're not organic, so it doesn't really matter. And these components are not where living quarters are, so even if they have slight radiation on them, it's not going to affect anybody the same way as if this was in an actual place you're living. Now, the second step of this is how the ventilation is actually done inside of your actual bunker. Normal ventilation for large buildings is it has intakes and it has outs. So it pulls air in certain places, it pushes air out everywhere else so that they can cool down, and you can pull the air in so that they can have hot air and cool that air down so that You're not cooling down air from outside, you're cooling down air from the area that you're trying to keep cool. That way it cools down faster and more efficiently. Now these pumps, or air handlers as they're actually called, are going to be located where the algae is. Why? Because that's where the air is going to come in to be cooled down and circulated. So usually in large buildings, they have a room where the air handlers are and they run, and they have pipes or ducts running from different parts of the building back to that room. They just go into that room, and as the air handlers run, it pulls air from that room and pushes it out. As it pulls air from that room, it pulls it out of the vents, which lead to different places in the original building. You can do the same thing. You can have the air pulled out from different places and it pushes back out. You can do that, but it wouldn't be a good idea. What you're going to actually do is you're going to have the air being pulled into one section and the air being pushed out of one section. So the area where the actual air handlers are located are going to be in a room by themselves, separated by a small hallway to create an air channel that pulls from the other room. The other room is going to be more open. It can be the room that you just have algae, and it can also be the room where you grow your plants and your food. That room is going to be the main room, and that room is going to have the vents that go to that room. So it's going to pull through that room, which is pulling over all the plants and all the algae. So the older air comes into that room. It mixes with the air from the plants and all the algae, which is going to be the more oxygenated air, and then it's going to be pulled across the room into the room where the air handler is pushing the air back out. This creates an air channel or draft of constant flowing air that flows from all the areas of your bunker to back to where the plants are so they can get more oxygen and then back out. Kind of like how your lungs work. And air handlers have basic filtration systems on them also. But because of the way it's functioning, you're also helping clean the air because you're pulling the air over and through plants, which help purify air. As we all know, areas with a lot more plants have much cleaner air, not only because they convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, but because they also help absorb some of the toxins in the air. So you're doing two things, one stone. Basically, you're helping ventilate and circulate the air to prevent air from carbon dioxide from building up in certain places, and you're helping also reoxygenate in the air and also helping to be air scrubber at the same time. Now in the same room where you have your condensers for your AC units that's going to be pumping out hot air, you're going to have systems to generate your power. You're going to have whatever power generation systems you're using, whether it be nuclear or gas powered or whatever, they're going to be there. So they can also have access to the outside air. Doesn't matter if the outside air is toxic because you're dumping out basically your contaminants and your heat. That's what that room is for, it's to pump the air out. All you need is a fan inside of that room that's pushing air out, or a fan pulling air in. You don't need to do fan for one direction. You don't need both, because once you push air in one way, the air is going to leave the other way, or if you push air out one way, it's going to pull it in wherever it can pull it from. Either way, you just need one fan that's running to create the air circulation to constantly ventilate that room. So that if you have to run generators, it prevents it from only running. It'll prevent it from basically running out of air from the outside. And if you have nuclear, it's a way to help ventilate the nuclear and the heat, which is mainly what that room will be for, to dissipate the heat. So now you have power, you have oxygen, you have ventilation. And if you're growing your plants, because there are lots of plants that you can grow in low light, and there's also lots of different lighting that you can use, like grow lights, to help plants grow. Now, one of the ways of growing plants is something called aquaponics, which is basically growing plants in water only, no soil. And that's a way of growing plants indefinitely without having to rotate your area of growing plants. So you don't need to rotate your crops, basically, because it's all coming from the water. Now, one of the things a lot of people do when they have large aquaponic system is they have animals, or mostly fishes, mostly all kinds of fishes, live inside of a container, and that container is what feeds the plants. So the water goes into that container, and they pump water from that container over to the plants and help onto all the plants' roots. Basically, what happens is the waste from the fishes and whatever animals is living in that container is what goes to generate the fuel the plants need to live. Now you can subsidize this with a little bit of nutrients and stuff like that, and you can stockpile nutrients that you will need for plants to grow for 100 years, and it's not going to require that much space. And you can also get some of these nutrients from the soil you're in, basically around the bunker also. And what you could end up doing is you can end up creating a system where you can grow different kinds of food. You can grow all the plant foods you need through the aquaponics system, through basically all the piping. You grow these plants in basic piping is how it's kind of set up. Grow these plants in this piping system, and the plants grow even faster than if they're growing in soil. And then you feed whatever parts of the plants you don't use, you can use to make a feed for all the fishes and whatever else you want to grow in these tanks, and use that to add to the tanks so that the fishes can eat, and they produce waste, and that waste is used to grow the plants, but it also makes the fishes grow, and that from fishes you can then eat those fishes. So you have a form of protein and plants at the same time. And even though whatever's left over from the fishes or whatever's left over from all the food, you can still grind down even more back into actual feed for these fishes, and these animals back into the feed for these animals. And it doesn't matter what kind of animal you grow, you can use the waste and the excess that you're not using for food, but it's still organic matter you can use for food for the animals that you're raising, and then the excess of it can be used for the plants. Which is how our planet actually works to begin with. You're basically just subsidizing what nature would do yourself. And that way, you have a full-blown ecosystem. One, you're generating food, you're cleaning your air, and the water that's going through the plants is being cleaned also, because now you don't have to focus so much on waste filtration. You filter some of your waste and you add that to the water that you're using for the plants and the fishes, and you have water there. You have dehumidifiers in your ventilation system to pull some of the water back out of the air, the excess water out of the air, so that now you're adding back into your water system, so your water system doesn't get depleted quickly. So now you have air circulation, carbon dioxide extraction, and oxygen insertion in your air, so carbon filters and carbon scrubbers. You have water generation and water cleaning. All of that goes with the plants being grown. So you have food being grown and actual different kinds of food that you can eat, so you don't go into malnutrition, because you have all different kinds of food that you can grow and produce. And you're going to have power generation in certain sections of your system. So the biggest thing you would actually have to worry about is power generation. Everything else can be used with older tech. And then for the construction of the actual bunker, you'll construct this bunker in a dome-like structure, because if you look back at history, one of the strongest architecture and stuff that's still around after over 1,000 years is archways, which are not even glued together, which are used what's called a keystone in the center point of the top of the arch. That keystone is actually what bears the weight of the entire arch, and then the more weight that's put on it, the more stable it gets, and it uses that keystone in the center to create a arch that's stronger than it would if you just put up an arch that's not in that same shape. Now you can use this as a base for a dome, and you run a keystone arc in the center of the dome, so that the top of your dome is where all the pressure is, and it pushes on top of keystone, which helps stabilize and refortify your actual structure, which keeps your structure strong from earthquakes and possibly a nuclear blast if it were to actually happen. So yeah, even though having a bunker underground seems like this far-fetched and mystical sci-fi thing that we will never get to, that we're still 100 years away from, it turns out all the technology required to build a bunker underground and make it sustainable for pretty much indefinitely existed a long time ago, and it just requires you to just put it together and use it. And the fact that we have nuclear power plants means we don't even have to worry that much about using something like a generator all the time that produces carbon dioxide. We can be okay because we have a nuclear power plant that's going to be separate from the actual area that we live in. So we have power, we have water, we have food, we have air. We have a way to clean the water, and we have a way to clean the actual air also. And upon the cleaning water, you can go a step further and you can use sand filters. Basically, you can build a sand filter from the dirt that you would have excavated when you built the bunker. And you can even leave a section open where you can continue activating, continue expanding your bunker, where you can actually just use the materials that come out of it. Sand filter is basically just a filter that starts with rocks that are quite pretty large, but not super large. They start with basically lava-sized rocks. It's a type of rock, so it's a porous rock. It starts with lava rocks, basically, goes down to gravel, it goes down to finer gravel until it goes down to sand, and then super fine sand. Basically, as the water goes through from the top all the way down to the bottom, it leaves behind whatever's in the water, and only the pure water actually comes out the bottom. It will have some bacteria in it, but then you can treat that water again with chemicals. Not a lot of chemicals, because you would not need a ton of chemicals after that. Yes, it's a very efficient way of filtering water. It is just quite slow at filtering water, but at the same time, if you're on the ground, you're in a bunker, and you have a limited amount of space to store, you can store a certain amount of water in that bunker, but then it wouldn't really matter how long it takes you to filter out the water. As long as you have enough stores left up, you can filter out the water as you use it, and it won't be a big deal, as you won't really matter. You can even have a well inside of your bunker at the same time that goes down deeper than your bunker to extract some water from deep in the ground. And it will be a slow extraction, but at the same time, because you're filtering a lot of the water you're using, you're pulling water out of the air that you're breathing. A lot of this stuff goes to recycle back into your system, which means you don't need to extract a lot of water from your deep bunker well at the same time. So all these things together, they're not new technology. They're not even like modern technology. They're older technology from the mid 80s and 70s. Some of it goes back as the like 1900s, and then even further into ancient like Rome and Greece, is the technology you would actually need to build a bunker on the ground and have this bunker be sustainable for an extended period of time. Because the more modern and more advanced the technology gets, the smaller it gets, the more fragile it gets, and the less likely it will be to survive a nuclear blast, earthquakes, solar flares, and all that stuff, which is the purpose of these bunkers. So yeah, building a bunker on the ground, not as far-fetched as it seems. It's not even like conspiracy level technology. It is like old technology. Not even that much of a conspiracy at this point. And yeah, rich people probably are building bunkers. Not really a big deal. Not a conspiracy to think that rich people are building bunkers on the ground. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about in my walk today. I'll see you guys later, probably tomorrow.